Envision a tribunal not grounded in terrestrial soil, but suspended within the very zenith of the heavens. The atmosphere vibrates with blinding luminescence, thrones extend into the infinite, and at the epicenter, the Creator sits in profound silence, his gaze blazing with an alloy of terrifying justice and boundless love. Before him, a celestial being kneels once brilliant, now obscured, his wings tattered by the grit of insurrection. Every other seraph who occupied his station has been banished into the void for eternity. Yet, this entity stands apart. This is Sariel, the singular fallen angel in the annals of everlasting time whom the Almighty absolved. But what set him apart? What deed earned him a second chance when no other could secure one? And what significance does his saga hold for your existence? For if redemption exists for a celestial prince, perhaps hope remains for you as well. Remain with me. This is a chronicle that predates the genesis of the world, plunges into the obsidian depths of mutiny, and ascends into the most unprecedented act of grace the cosmos has ever witnessed. This is Bible Mysteries, where we excavate the scriptures left unspoken in your Sunday instruction. Ensure you strike the like button, subscribe, and engage the bell icon so you never forfeit a voyage into the abyssal depths of the divine word. Before the inaugural sunrise gilded the Garden of Eden, before the cadence of a solitary human heart resonated through the void, there existed the Council of the Watchers. They were not warriors cast in Michael's mold, nor heralds like Gabriel. They were sentinels, observers, custodians of the divine architect's blueprint, and amidst their ranks stood Sariel. He was neither the most colossal nor the most thunderous of the host. His panoply bore no scars of cosmic warfare, and his voice did not detonate like a storm. Rather, he possessed an aura that compelled others to draw near. A tranquil profundity resided in his eyes, as though he perpetually perceived realities far beyond the celestial horizon. Sariel had been ordained with two monumental duties. First, to superintend the celestial mechanics of the moon, guaranteeing that time itself flowed according to the Creator's decree. Second, to maintain vigil over the spirits of mankind, not their mortal shells, but the imperishable, unseen fire burning within them. It was a vocation demanding infinite patience. He was compelled to station himself at a remove, gazing down upon the nascent world, protecting without intercession, steering without manifestation. From the precipice of heaven, Sariel would frequently peer down at the terrestrial realm, scrutinizing the primal humans. Adam and Eve, traversing the verdant forests, hand in hand, amid a world erupting with vitality, offspring splashing in crystalline rivulets, laughing devoid of terror, men fashioning the inaugural implements from stone. He observed the seasons metamorphose above them, the embrace of summer, the frigid whisper of autumn, the silence of the snow. And with every cycle the moon concluded, Sariel chronicled it in his archives, cognizant that in God's flawless timing, this species would flourish in wisdom. Yet, a disturbing sentiment began to take root. When Sariel beheld humanity, he experienced an emotion not all celestials could comprehend: compassion. He did not merely view them as components of the Creator's schematic. He perceived their tribulation, the manner in which they occasionally stumbled into peril, the suddenness with which infirmity could strike, how famine could render even the mightiest warrior frail. Not all watchers shared this empathy. Some surveyed mortals with frigid detachment. Others coveted them with excessive admiration. It commenced with hushed dialogues among the vigilant, clandestine whispers in the courts of the high heavens. Why must we remain so distant? If we walked among them, we could shepherd them directly. We possess gnosis that could shield them. Why sequester it? Sariel attempted to disregard these murmurs initially. He knew the Creator's edict: do not traverse the veil between heaven and earth unless dispatched. It was not a matter of arrogance or dominion. It was a matter of chronology. Divine knowledge is akin to fire. In the proper hearth, it warms and sustains life. But introduced prematurely, it incinerates everything to ash. One nighter, what serves as night in a realm without darkness, Sariel stood observing a diminutive human encampment far below. A child lay infirm in her mother's embrace, respiration shallow. The woman's eyes shimmered with tears as she whispered supplications to the void. Sariel's essence convulsed with grief. He knew the remedy. The soil beneath them nurtured a flora whose foliage, when pulverized and steeped, could banish the fever. It was elementary, yet it was proscribed. And for the first instance, Sariel interrogated the law. Not long thereafter, the watchers convened in secrecy upon the summit of Mount Hermon, a peak so lofty it seemed to brush the underbelly of the firmament. 200 of them gathered, their forms incandescent under the starlight. Sariel stood amongst them as their chieftain, Shemihaza, addressed the assembly. "Brethren," Shemihaza intoned, his voice rolling like distant artillery, "you have witnessed their agony. You have watched them flounder. We hold the potency to terminate it. But to execute this, we must descend, not as spirits, but as men." A murmur of concord rippled through the ranks. Some vacillated, aware of the ultimate price. But Shemihaza pressed his advantage. "If we act in unison, there can be no retreat. Let us swear a covenant together. If one falls, we all fall. We shall partake in the consequences, whatever they may be." Sariel's heart hammered. He envisioned the dying child. He thought of the agrarians, struggling to decipher the seasons. He thought of the mothers paralyzed by the unknown. And when the oath was sworn, Sariel did not recede. That night, they plummeted from the heavens like a deluge of sentient stars. The mortals, startled by the spectacle, sprinted to the mountaintop, where the watchers now stood in guises resembling men. Yet, with eyes incinerating like the core of a furnace, the people did not recoil in terror. They reached out in reverence. Sariel knelt amidst them, palpating the soil, inhaling the fragrance of dust for the first time. He instructed them on tracking the lunar phases, discerning when to sow and when to reap. He tutored the women on how to amalgamate specific leaves into infusions that could remedy fevers and assuage pain. In the twilights, he would sit by their hearths, recounting the sagas of the constellations. However, not all that was bestowed was benevolent. Some watchers distributed instruments of slaughter. Others disseminated dark arts that warped the human soul. The more knowledge that poured forth, the more humanity's innocence began to erode. One evening, as Sariel gazed upon the people he cherished, he witnessed a sight that froze his blood. 2 men clashing with blades forged from the metal the watchers had unveiled. Gore stained the earth. The slayer's eyes were filled not with remorse but with hubris. It was then Sariel felt the initial sting of culpability. He had desired to aid, but had they merely unlocked the gateway to annihilation? The voice arrived like a gale through his marrow, audible not to the ears, but to the spirit. "Sariel." He knew instantly it was the architect. "What have you done?" The gravity of the inquiry pulverized him, and for the first time in his immortal existence, Sariel knew terror. The night the summons arrived, the sky above Mount Hermon fractured like glass. The mortals below felt it before they perceived it. The wind ceased. The avian choirs fell silent. Even the insects sought refuge. The atmosphere grew dense, charged, as if all creation had inhaled a single breath and refused to exhale. Then came the illumination. It was not the soft radiance of dawn nor the silver wash of moonlight Sariel adored. This was a light that pierced bone and essenced the radiance of heaven descending in adjudication. The watchers were seized, not by mortal hands, but by forces invisible to the flesh, angels of fire and tempest, unfallen and unwavering, dispatched to retrieve the rebels. Sariel offered no resistance. Some of his brethren fought, their countenances contorted with rage and incredulity. Others maligned the messengers, screaming that their deeds were noble, that God was unjust to castigate them. Sariel merely bowed his head. The visages of the humans he had instructed flashed before his mind's eye. The healed child, the grateful kin, the farmers feeding their villages, and then the carnage he had witnessed. Had he bestowed life, or had he supplied the means to extinguish it? They were hauled to the throne room, the sanctum no angel enters unless summoned. Visualize an expanse so vast that stars burn in the periphery like torches along the ramparts, a floor of crystalline glass mirroring the infinite light above. And at the nexus, the throne, the seat of the Creator, where justice and mercy converge. Michael stood at one flank, Gabriel at the other, their expressions inscrutable. The watchers knelt some defiantly, others trembling. Sariel simply closed his eyes. The Creator's voice was not like the wind this time. It was not like thunder. It was everything. You were granted a station among the holy. You were entrusted to vigil over my children, and yet you descended. You defied. You corrupted. A murmur of protest rose from the throng of the fallen. Silence. The word was not shouted. It simply was. And the chamber obeyed. The judgment was swift. Every watcher who descended was to be shackled in chains beneath the mountains, in a void where no photon would ever penetrate until the day of judgment. There would be no appeal, no second chance, no redemption. One by one, seraphim of fire stepped forward, wreathing chains of light around the rebels' arms and wings. The chains did not merely bind their corporeal forms, they seared into their spirits, severing them from the anthem of heaven. Sariel felt it a sudden vacuum, as if someone had excised the core of his being. The tether to God, the constant resonance of divine presence that every angel perceives, was extinguished. It was in that silence that Sariel comprehended the true nature of hell. Here is where Sariel's narrative begins to diverge from the others. Many of the watchers spat maledictions as they were dragged away. Others plotted retribution, their minds already warped by hubris. But Sariel began to weep not out of terror for himself, but because he realized the devastation he had wrought. He recalled the child he had healed. He recalled the men forging weapons from the knowledge he provided, and he whispered, almost too faintly for the court to discern, "Lord, I am sorry." No angel had ever uttered those words from that abyss before. They were cast into the bowels of the earth, far beneath the mountains where they had first descended. The atmosphere was frigid, the darkness absolute. For the others, the chains were the finale. They succumbed to acrimony, their spirits twisting into entities almost unrecognizable. For Sariel, the chains became a crucible. In the silence, bereft of everything but his own thoughts, he began to pray, not for liberation, not for his former glory, but for absolution. He prayed for the humans he had instructed, that they would utilize the benevolent and reject the malevolent. He prayed for the watchers who mocked him, that somehow they too would perceive the truth. And above all, he prayed that if God ever granted him the minutest opportunity to serve again, he would seize it, even if it meant no one would ever recall his name. Aeons passed in the dungeon of the watchers. Not days, not years. Time in that realm was an alien construct. The others tallied their existence in bitterness. Sariel tallied his in supplication. He possessed no light, no firmament, no moon to track. The very function God had assigned him to mark the passage of time had been stripped away. All that persisted was the steady rhythm of his own spirit bowing low in contrition. Then, in one momentif, one can even term it a moment, in that timeless void, Sariel sensed something he hadn't felt since the courtroom. A presence. It was faint initially, like the scent of rain preceding a tempest, or the distant warmth of a fire not yet visible. And then he heard it. Sariel. His eyes flew open. He assumed it was a memory, a phantom echo of the past. But the voice arrived again, not as the crushing judgment it once was, but softer, almost tender. Sariel, rise. In the darkness, the chains that bound him began to resonate with a strange luminescence, not the blinding fire of adjudication, but a soft golden radiance, warm, alive. The others stared in disbelief. "What is this?" one hissed. "Why him?" another growled. The glow intensified, and for the first time in an age, Sariel felt the traction of heaven summoning him upward. He did not know why. He did not dare to ask. He simply whispered, "Thank you." And then, he was vanished from the pit. Sariel stood once again in the court of heaven. It felt different now. Previously, he had walked in as one who belonged, confident, draped in glory. Now he stood as one stripped bare, humbled, and utterly dependent on the mercy of the one before him. The Creator's voice saturated the expanse. "Sariel, Do you know why you are here?" Sariel bowed so low his forehead grazed the glass-like floor. "No, Lord. Only that you have called, and I am here. I have witnessed your heart in the obsidian dark. You grieved not for your station, but for your sin. You sought not your own glory, but my mercy." There was a pause, the sort of silence where the entire cosmos seems to lean in to listen. "Rise, Sariel. Your chains are shattered. I am sending you forth again." Sariel trembled. "Lord, am I worthy?" "No," the Creator stated plainly. "But my mercy makes you so." He was granted a new vocation, no longer a watcher in the ancient sense, no longer one to unveil the deep mysteries of heaven prematurely. Now Sariel would serve as a shepherd to human souls, a healer to the broken, a guardian to those walking in the valley of the shadow of death. Some traditions assert this was the moment Sariel became an angel of healing, laboring alongside Raphael. Others claim he became the guardian of the moon once more, yet this time not to divulge forbidden secrets, but only to maintain the rhythm of God's creation in order. But whatever the title, one truth towered above all. Sariel was the first and only fallen angel to be restored. News spread through the hosts of heaven like wildfire. Some rejoiced. Angels who had once loved Sariel celebrated his return. Others struggled to comprehend. Why him? Why not the others? Does this imply any fallen angel could return? Michael, ever the commander, answered unequivocally, "No. Mercy is granted to those who repent." And only Sariel repented. When Sariel's eyes opened again, it was not to the blinding radiance of heaven, but to the soft sheen of moonlight over a tranquil valley. The air was crisp, carrying the fragrance of cedar and wildflowers. The sound of a stream whispered nearby. Somewhere in the distance, a shepherd sang to his flock. For a moment, Sariel simply stood motionless, allowing the world to respire around him. He had been absent from earth for what felt like an eternity, yet it was as though he could still hear the phantom echo of the chains that once bound him. The last time Sariel had walked the earth, he had descended like a star, plummeting from the firmament, brilliant, awe-inspiring, terrifying in majesty. This time was different. There was no blaze of glory, no throng of humans rushing to witness the man from the skies. He appeared quietly, unseen, like a shadow that only the spiritually awakened might discern. It was intentional. This was not a mission to be heralded. It was a mission to serve. Not far from the valley, Sariel discovered a small hamlet. The inhabitants were weary, their garments threadbare, their eyes heavy with famine and anxiety. Near the perimeter of the village, he spotted a boy lying in the dust. His dermis was pallid, his breath shallow. A woman knelt beside him, desperately attempting to feed him water from a fractured clay cup. Sariel knelt opposite her. She did not know who he was. She saw only a stranger with kind eyes. He asked, "What befell your son?" The woman's voice trembled. "The fever arrived 3 days ago. I have prayed for healing, but the herbs I once knew how to utilize, they have been forgotten." Sariel's chest tightened. It was his fault that humanity had once learned too much too soon, and now, in terror, had discarded even the benevolent knowledge. But this time, he did not reveal forbidden secrets. Instead, he knelt and prayed. His hand rested on the boy's brow, and with a whisper that only heaven could hear, he invoked the Creator's mercy. Moments later, the boy's respiration deepened. Color returned to his cheeks. The mother's eyes brimmed with tears as she pulled him close. "Who are you?" she asked. Sariel smiled faintly. "A friend. Nothing more." And before she could thank him, he was gone, dissolving into the crowd. This became his modus operandi. Sariel traversed the earth, moving from village to village. He tended the infirm. He guided the lost. He whispered words of fortitude into the hearts of those who had relinquished hope. Sometimes he worked through dreams, planting visions in the minds of those requiring direction. Sometimes he simply walked beside the lonely, unseen, until they located their way home. One night, Sariel stood solitary in a field, gazing up at the moon. It was full and luminous, casting a silver patina across the land. The moon had been his primary assignment, the great chronometer of the heavens. Now, as he beheld it, he realized it had become something more a memento. The moon does not shine with its own brilliance. It reflects the light of the sun, and Sariel knew that was his nature now. He possessed no light of his own anymore, only what the Creator permitted to shine through him. It was in that field that he heard a voice, deep, familiar, and frigid. "You do not belong here." Sariel turned to witness one of the watchers, still bound in bitterness, yet roaming in spirit to tempt and corrupt. His chains were spiritual now, invisible, but they still held fast. The fallen one sneered, "Do you believe your service renders you one of them again? You are still one of us, Sariel. You shattered the law. You fell." Sariel's voice was tranquil. "Yes, I fell, but I petitioned for mercy, and he bestowed it." The other angel spat in the dust. "Mercy is weakness." Sariel stepped closer. "No, mercy is a strength you will never comprehend." And with that, the figure vanished into the gloom, unable to endure the presence of the light Sariel now carried. Sariel's labor on earth spanned generations. He had trekked through deserts with nomads, sat in the corners of bustling bazaars, and stood in silent woodlands, listening to the prayers of the isolated. But one night, under the silver illumination of the moon, the voice arrived again. Sariel. It had been year, perhaps century since he had heard it so lucidly. His heart stirred. He fell to his knees. "Your time here is nearly concluded. But before you return to me, there is one final task you must execute. Far to the north, in a land blanketed in winter, there lay a village that had turned completely from the ways of God. They no longer prayed. They no longer extended kindness to one another. Violence and suspicion filled their days. But in that village lived one girl, a child of 8, whose heart still quietly whispered to the Creator. Her parents were gone. She was tended to by strangers who viewed her only as another mouth to feed. Yet still, every night she spoke to heaven before she slept. The mission was simple in words, but not in weight. Protect her, guide her, and bring her faith into the light. Sariel traveled north unseen, his footsteps silent over the snow. The wind howled across the glacial hills, but he felt no cold. His focus was on the solitary flicker of faith he could sense. The girl's prayers were faint but steady, like a candle fighting the encroaching darkness. When he reached the village, he saw the reality. Harsh visages, vacant eyes, doors slammed against strangers. No laughter, no music. The girl was there in a small timber hut, kneeling beside her pallet. Her voice was barely a whisper. "God, if you hear me, please send someone." Sariel could not appear in resplendent glory. That would terrify them. Instead, he assumed the guise of a quiet traveler. He began to assist the villagers in small ways, repairing a fractured roof, hauling water from the frozen river, leaving firewood at doorsteps during the night. For the girl, he became a friend. He told her stories not directly from heaven, but woven with truths about love, forgiveness, and courage. He taught her kindness not as a rule, but as a lifestyle. Slowly, her faith grew robust, and something unexpected began to manifest. Her light spread. A neighbor helped her in return, then another. A smile here, a shared meal there. Like ice fracturing in spring, the village began to thaw. One night, disaster struck. A fire erupted in one of the huts. The wind caught it, and soon the entire village was in peril. The girl was trapped inside. Sariel moved faster than thought. He pushed through the inferno, found her huddled in a corner, and shielded her with his own body as he carried her out. She coughed and gasped, clinging to him. When they reached the snow outside, she looked up at him, and for a moment, she saw through the disguise. Her eyes widened. "You are an angel," Sariel smiled softly. "No, I am just someone God forgave." And before she could speak again, he vanished into the night. The voice came once more, stronger now. "It is finished." Sariel felt the pull, not the downward drag of chains, but the upward draw of home. When he opened his eyes again, he stood before the throne, but this time there was no fear. The Creator spoke. "Well done, Sariel. You were faithful in small things. You guarded not with power, but with love, and so your place is secure. The halls of heaven filled with radiance as Sariel took his station among the redeemed, not because he had never fallen, but because he had been elevated by mercy. Sariel's narrative isn't merely about an angel. It is about you. It is about me. We have all crossed lines we shouldn't have. We have all stood in places we didn't belong. But Sariel's existence tells us something the enemy never wants us to believe, that it is not too late to return. He is the proof that God's mercy can reach even the furthest fall. And if there is hope for an angel, there is hope for you. Thank you for joining me on this journey into one of heaven's most extraordinary redemption sagas. If you felt this message stir something in your heart, do not let it end here. Carry it with you. Share it with someone who needs to hear that it is never too late. And remember, this is Bible Mysteries, where we uncover the stories most people have never heard, but that can change everything. If you haven't already, hit like, subscribe, and click that bell so you never miss what is coming next. Until next time, stay curious, stay hopeful, and keep your eyes on the